The Drake Group Education Fund is dedicated to educating the public and professionals in our business with fact-based information featuring the experts in our profession so that we might all do a better job of helping college athletes realize the promise of an educational degree and becoming all they can be as students and athletes and the athletics administrators who are managing these programs. So we welcome you to our 43rd webinar. Lastly, thanks to all of our panelists for their time, expertise, and ideas, and to all of you for attending. Webinars provide us with the opportunity to share new ideas, recalibrate our thinking on issues, and get up to date on important topics. We're so pleased to have you join us. I want to emphasize the speakers are expressing their own opinions and not the opinions of the organizations in which they are employed or are members, unless they make that distinction in their remarks. Now, I'm honored to introduce the moderator of today's program. Please meet Dr. Bruce Smith, Director of Empowerment Strategies, CEO of ACES Group, and a member of our board of directors.
Thank you so much, Julie. I am so happy to be here as a part of this discussion about a vital topic, not just in college sports, but in our society. When you all registered for the webinar, you received the biographies of each of our panelists, but I want to thank them right now and briefly acknowledge each one of them before we get rolling. Dr. Michelle Richardson is Associate Professor and Program Coordinator of Sport Management, Coppin State University College of Business, and a long time friend of mine. Jen Fry, Dr. Jen Fry is sports geographer, a tech founder, a TEDx speaker, as well as a sought-after speaker in many other venues and educator. I'm super glad that she's here also. Dr. Howard Kroom III, who I got to meet just a few years ago, is Associate Vice President, People Strategy, Equity and Culture at Portland Community College. Each of these folks will have an opportunity to explain or dive into their own biographies as we get rolling. But I want to start off the discussion today just with a reminder from our program description. So this is what our description says. In recent years, college athletics programs have developed formalized internal structures designed to address problems related to equity in college sports. Responding to data and issues that the Drake Group addresses in its papers, these athletic departments created DEI offices staffed by professionals with expertise in college sports, academic excellence, and equity and inclusion. Well, however, the Supreme Court's 2023 affirmative action decision and a current political climate that is hostile to DEI programs on college campuses represent an assault on the progress that these college athletics DEI programs represent. This webinar explains the growing importance of intentionally investing in DEI programs in college sports within the ever-changing landscape of college sports. As a DEI professional myself, I want to place a highlight on the word intentionally and investing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go today. I'll start with this. Our country is heavily invested in the idea of meritocracy. And when we talk about DEI, I don't think you can have a conversation about that topic without talking about meritocracy. From its colonial beginnings, America has draped itself in this flag of meritocracy and the idea that you get what you earn and that the highest earners and most successful among us have worked harder, longer, and smarter than everyone else. It is our belief, our society's belief, that hard work leads to success and that success is always earned. Merit, therefore, is a guiding principle that is passed down to groups and individuals by way of the country's strongest institutions. The Christian church, for example, we are encouraged to earn our way into heaven. One of the many lessons we learn in public schools especially is that the highest achievers have earned all that they are giving. The media, perhaps the most powerful social institution in our society, has for centuries crafted stories about those who achieve success and that makes those individuals seem heroic and meritorious. Sport also is a major social institution in our country. Sport is described as the opiate of the masses for some very real reasons. The narratives about our greatest sports heroes always include stories about their outstanding work ethic, their willingness to all but torture themselves for victory, and their steadfast belief in the power of hard work. We are told that their success and their belief in themselves can all be traced back to that foundation of hard work. In sport, merit reigns. Now, despite this focus on merit, access to opportunity and wealth in this country is largely determined by race, gender, zip code, and other identity factors. Those in the DEI profession ask why this is so. That's our guiding question. Why is there a glass ceiling in coaching and executive positions, for example? And we'll get into that as we go today. I believe strongly that the data on access to opportunity and wealth demonstrates that meritocracy is indeed a myth. As DEI professionals, we want to look at the data and ask at least this simple question. If we live in a society that's guided by meritocracy, why are so many successful people and high achievers white, male, and straight? We also want to know why so many social institutions are telling us not to ask or answer that question. Like I said before, I'm super excited for this conversation today with Michelle, Jen, and Howard, folks I've been listening to and reading for a number of years and who bring years of experience, a keen eye, and a sharp mind to the conversations about race, sport, education, and the many places where those three overlap. We'll start with each panelist answering this question. What is diversity, equity, inclusion? And I would love to hear from Dr. Fry first.
I always hate starting things off, Bruce.
That's why I started with you, Jen.
So I just want to say I am so glad to be surrounded by these doctors. Like, we don't get these opportunities that much. So this is a class act group right here. And Michelle, we have to get together. We're literally like a mile down the road. Like, there's no more excuses. I could walk to you right now. So, you know, after 2020, I feel like we all kind of know what DEI is. To me, DEI is two things. It's all the topics your parents told you not to talk about at the table: race, sex, politics, all of that. And the second thing that DEI is, it's the ugly underbelly of America that everyone wants to keep a lid on the pot. Those would probably be my two ways of explaining DEI. Because if it wasn't, no one would want to stop it as bad as they do.
Thanks, Jen. Michelle, you want to go next?
I will say yes, all of that what Jen is saying. And also let's just we can throw age and we can throw ability and gender in there as well. Gender and sexuality. DEI is just this thing. I'm going to tell you, to me, it's hard to define because it's so many things. And like I said, and when we say diversity, we're talking about not even like physical diversity, but diversity of thought. And that's also a thing that we have, you know, when you talk about meritocracy in the Christian church, diversity and equity and inclusion of thought and of religion and of education. So there's a whole lot more into it than just what people think it is. And it's not taking away, it should be adding to the tapestry of what we in the nation that we live in.
Thank you, Michelle. Howard, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I agree with what my panelists have said. And I think DEI is so hard to describe or define because are we talking about those three letters together? Are we talking about the words and the definition of each of the words? It's tricky. It's difficult. So what I would say is DEI can be described as a framework for advancing fairness and inclusion in organizations and communities and in institutions, but it's a framework for advancing fairness and inclusion. It represents both a mindset and a strategic effort to address systemic inequities, historical inequities, to foster diverse representation and create environments where everyone can thrive. We're kind of hitting at each of the three letters. But in other words, DEI, again, we're thought of it as lumped together. I like to say diversity, equity, and inclusion. But DEI, it's not just a theoretical concept. It's an approach to problem solving. It's an approach to cultural transformation that integrates diversity, equity, and inclusion into the fabric of the society, the organization. So DEI principles are integrated into policies, practice, and everyday interaction. So it's both an ideal to strive for and a practical field of work focused on advancing fairness and making fairness actionable. It's a lot of ways to describe it.
Thanks, Howard. I want to follow up and get your thought, each of your thoughts on this question. If I were to say that DEI is a structure or a system, how would you then continue to answer that question? What is DEI? What about DEI is represented by the idea of structures and systems? Howard, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Like I said, it's a structure, it's a system for solving a problem. It's a system for advancing inclusion, advancing fairness. So yeah, DEI, it again, it's kind of weird to talk about it as an it, but yeah, when we're talking about it as an it's a framework, it's a structure, it's a way to approach cultural transformation and change within an organization or a society.
Michelle?
I said, well, as I said, it is a structure. And it's something to be built upon. It's not something that is taking away. So what we're building with this structure of diversity, equity, and inclusion is we're building places where people feel comfortable. Not every place is for everybody. So we're building, schools. The diversity is when we come in and we celebrate different cultures, when we celebrate different groups of people with abilities, people with disabilities. It's something to build on. Like I said, I'm sorry. I got all these things, when you start talking and all these thoughts start rushing through your head. But it's this place where you build a place that everybody can find a place to be. Because that's one of the hardest things to do, is to find a place where you can just be, and you're not thinking of yourself as able or queer or black or straight. You're just being. It's a structure to create a place to be.
Jen, what are you thinking?
So the way I kind of think of it is, how you have like micro machines that can be different things at different times. That's what I look at as DEI. So for instance, I have this kind of note on my wall, and throughout like the last decade, we see different points within the US. We saw Roe v. Wade, trans rights, right? We saw all that. And so I look at DEI as a shapeshifter. For the Me Too movement, it's going to be very different than what it is for Roe v. Wade. Then if we can go back to when we talk about when ADA was put into place, it's going to shift. It should be something that is literally like a transformer that transforms for the needs of the people that it's going to be affecting. Because it's not, kind of to hit on what Michelle said, it's not going to be the same for everybody. The needs of DEI for trans folk is going to be very different. It's going to be the same foundation, right? The same like micro machine foundation, but it's going to be a different animal for trans folks than it would be maybe for disabled folks. There's still similarities, right? It's not saying that trans folks can't be disabled. So the wheels are all there, but it's going to have to shift in different ways, in the way language is, and the way it's approached, and the way policy is written. And so we have to think of it as kind of these micro machine transformers that transforms to meet the needs of whatever group we're raising at that point to help them navigate.
That's right. I really like that that framework, Jen, and the inflection points that you have on that post that you have on there taped to your wall make me think about this as well. The discussion that we're going to have today, it promises to be incredibly complex and wide-ranging, and we'll need to ground ourselves in some shared understandings, not just about what DEI is, but also what is the assault on DEI. That's what this this webinar is supposed to be about, this assault, and how we're experiencing it, and also how we're responding to it. So I'd love for you all to share your thoughts on what the assault on DEI is from your perspectives that we're experiencing in this current political and social moment. Howard, you want to start us off there?
Yep, happy to. So the current assault on DEI to me is unfortunate, but it's not surprising. And I believe that the assault on DEI is fundamentally driven by misinformation and driven by a deliberate mischaracterization of what DEI means. I think that is at the crux. misinformation and a mischaracterization deliberately of what DEI is. And so critics and folks who oppose DEI weaponize the term, the three letters together, to mean quotas, unqualified candidates, and reverse discrimination. And this framing of DEI as these negative things deliberately distorts the true purpose of DEI as a framework for advancing fairness. So at its core, to me, the backlash isn't about DEI practices, it's about power and privilege. And so, you know, when you're trying to advance DEI, when you're trying to advance or put forth, work in a framework to advance fairness and equity, we start to address these systemic inequities and transform culture. Inherently, this challenges power structure. It challenges those who benefit from the traditional power structures. And so these folks, what we see on a wide scale, is DEI, you know, folks weaponize cultural anxieties. Particularly from my lens, the cultural anxieties that are weaponized to push this assault on DEI are rooted in hypermasculinity, religious conservatism, and traditional values. So from my lens, the strategy is clear. Take the framework designed to advance fairness, reframe it as a threat to traditional values and meritocracy, and use that manufactured threat, that fake threat manufactured, to maintain existing power dynamics. And so essentially, DEI is the bad guy. DEI, and now, you know, when people think about DEI, they think about Black folks getting opportunities they don't deserve, women getting opportunities that they don't deserve, LGBTQ plus inclusion that's quote unquote gone too far. To me, it all hinges very clearly on misinformation and mischaracterizing what DEI means.
Thanks, Howard. Michelle. All right, you just muted yourself.
Okay? There we go. Going on kind of what Howard was saying, you know, I'm a woman of a certain age. I am part of the first generation of affirmative action, you know, the things that my parents fought for. And I said, there was a saying that they used to have, and they said, we're not asking for a handout, just a hand.
Mm-hmm.
DEI has been framed, worked in a way to say that the people who are getting these things, because we're letting more African Americans in colleges and universities, in predominantly white colleges and universities, that they didn't really deserve it. They didn't earn that spot. They're just there because we need to have numbers in blackness. As you said, do we belong here? Yes, I belong here. It's like, I belong here and everybody else. We're just saying we're going to level the playing field up, because there's some kid who was born with not even a silver spoon, it was platinum. The hardest thing they had to do was get to the kitchen table on time if the kitchen table wasn't brought to them. And what we're saying is this person has the same skills, has the same set of skills. They just need the opportunity. And that's really the boils down to. But it's like I said, it's been weaponized. At University of Texas, Abby Fisher, you didn't get it. No, Abby, you got it. You know, you might. I looked at her. You were average. You were average, Abby. She was average. So when you see people, like I said, just kind of going back to this past year, running for president, you got Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is a Howard University graduate, by the way, HU, you know. She's a Howard University graduate. She was top in her class at the University of San Francisco Law School. I think it was Golden Gate Law School. She all these accolades, the district attorneys, the senator, and yet she didn't earn it. She slept her way to the top. Nobody's sex is that good. I'm sorry. Nobody's sex is that good.
Stop. I am really happy, Michelle, that you brought up the idea of affirmative action. And then, you know, sometimes people get upset with me for me saying, you know, yeah, I'm an affirmative action baby. And I'm proud of that folks, I'm part of a generation of folks who finally our country opened themselves up to communities where they weren't looking before. And it's not like the talent wasn't there. The talent has always been there. And now myself and others get to be seen by folks who are looking for talent, right?
The talent has definitely been there. The talent, like I said, you look at the things that, like I said, the things that people take for granted, the talent has been there since we were brought to these shores as enslaved men and women. You look at, like I said, the things that people don't know about Garrett Morris and the traffic light. If you look at the golf team, the whitest sport in the world, golf, and the thing so intricate to the game, the golf tee, was invented by a Black man. These things that people use that they use in their day-to-day lives were by Black people, were invented by Black people. But it's like this anti-affirmative action, this anti-DEI, this anti-Blackness, this anti-person of color is trying to wipe away everything that we've done without, in spite of these systems being set up for us to fail. In spite of these systems. Now, just think if these systems were equal, bring us your coal, if we were like the Statue of Liberty, just think if these systems weren't there and everyone got this fair chance, no matter what, we would be the excellence we think we are.
Mm. Jen, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that I think we have to pay attention to. Is the connection of power to language, and how we haven't paid attention to the words that we've held up, they have been able to take control of. And we need to pay more attention, right? The word DEI, the word woke, like this aspect of control. So when you control language, you have power. So I think that was, one of the first big assaults on DEI. I think the next thing is, when we talk about language of the assault, is who deserves to win. And when I say win, I mean that in an overarching, who deserves to go to college, who deserves jobs, because so much of the language is they are stealing our jobs. AKA, these things were set aside for us. These random people are stealing these things that have no business owning them. I think the next thing is when we talk about affirmative action, we have to lay the foundation that white women are the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action. The biggest beneficiaries by far. And I think the assault on DEI shows us that white women are willing to burn themselves to stay proximal to white male power.
Oh, talk about that a little more, Jen.
Well, I mean, like, they're willing to light themselves on fire. Affirmative action has made more white women doctors, dentists, lawyers, CEOs.
Coaches.
Huh?
Coaches,
everything. Like, affirmative action has helped them so much. And they don't pay attention to these civil rights laws that have also elevated them. And so whenever they mention affirmative action, they want to burn it to the ground because a few Black dots like you, Bruce, might succeed.
Mm.
Even though the overwhelmingly white dots are succeeding, they will burn themselves for it. There was an article written by an alt-right woman who was so mad that these alt-right men were treating them terribly, because they thought, as long as we both hate Black people, brown people, it's going to elevate us together, not realizing, baby, no, they're using you as a stepping stone. The misogynistics, the patriarchy, they're going to push you down to keep what they want. And the fact that they were upset that they weren't being treated as equal, you're never going to be treated as equal. And so they are willing to burn themselves in these aspects. There's a book, I can't think of the guy who wrote it, about Ohio, and how we always talk about people are voting against their best interests. No, they're not. They're willing to burn themselves. They're willing to say, I know I need medical, but I don't want this Black person to get it for free, so I'm willing not to have it and get the oxygen I need. I am willing to vote no on this bond because this poor school will get money, even though I know it will hurt my school. So these assaults on DEI are just hurting themselves. But when you think you're proximal to white maleness, you're willing to do whatever it takes, burn, scorch the earth, to get a little bit closer, not realizing that all you're doing is you're just being a stepping stone for them to get higher and higher and higher. And I think lastly, this assault on DEI, the reason why there's such an assault after 2020 is because 2020 made people really reshape how they view race, gender, and more importantly, how they got what they got. And it made them realize that maybe they didn't get it because of their grades. They didn't get it because of their intelligence. They didn't get all these things for what their mom and dad said that they got. And it made them really rethink and peel the scab off of all this stuff that they didn't want to have to acknowledge. And that's why so many people are just trying to put a scab back on, is because we opened Pandora's box and they're realizing all these things that they got access to and got, maybe they actually didn't deserve in the way that they've been told for decades that they actually deserve.
Hey, Jen, I think actually kind of piggybacking on what you said, Jen, actually what they're realizing is their mediocrity. All these, I look at Elon Musk. He is the most mediocre person I've ever seen in my life. He is mediocre. And he got all of his money from his father. He's not smart. He's not incredibly brilliant. He just has the money to fake people out. But he's not, it's like, so these people are looking at it's like what's happening is they're realizing how actually mediocre they are, beyond mediocre. Because, like I said, I didn't have to do anything. I just had to have the money enough for people to do what I had to say. And your argument on white women, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not a feminist. I do not prescribe to feminism, because what I found from white feminists, I actually prescribe to more so womanism. But what I've found from feminism is they are women, they are sisters until and once they get what they want, they're white. They would rather sit on the bench than sit on the bench of the winning team, as opposed to put their whiteness in jeopardy and help everybody become equal. They would, like you said, as you said, burn down the house. They would actually, but I say they'd rather sit next to the proximity of fame. They'd rather be in the proximity of fame than to help everybody get the fame.
I think you're absolutely right, Jen and Michelle. And I tell people, and as a DEI professional myself, I tell people all the time, proximity to white maleness is a dangerous drug. And there's a question in the Q&A, and I don't know, Jen, if that's what sparked you on this, but it says, why do some DEI people, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but why do some DEI people sometimes vote for people like Trump and other conservatives that want to do away with DEI? And I think your comments, Jen and Michelle, both kind of answer that question. Howard, do you want to jump in there? And Jen, Michelle, please feel free to jump in also.
I honestly, I think what Jen brought up, it does address that question directly. I think what Jen and Michelle both, it's a question about folks, how down are you actually for the people? You say that you're down for the people. You say that you care about advancing progress, but when the rubber meets the road, are you going to do what's beneficial for you and people who look like you specifically? Are you actually going to be down for the greater good? And I think Jen just spoke to that elegantly.
Jen, Michelle, anything to add? Michelle, you're
Michelle,
muted.
you're muted.
I'm sorry. It's like, as long as we've been doing technology, I'm still
Right.
I'm still terrible at. But as I said, it's just that proximity to fame. Like I said, I'm a sport professor, so I always ask freshmen. First thing I said, do you want to work in sport or do you want to be in proximity to fame? That's really the simple action. So it's basically, and I said, if you want to just be in proximity, I said, get out of college, because you don't need a degree to be a groupie. And so it's kind of that situation. It's that situation. It's like, I'm going to be a groupie to this white maleness because I know I can get further than that. I can get further with being close to this white maleness than I can be being closer to other people of color, period. And I don't care. It's like I said, they're not voting for, these people aren't DEI people. The bottom line is you can't call them DEI people if they're not voting for their best interest. They're voting for their comfort. They're voting for their own comfort.
Right. If they're not voting for progress, I'm not sure DEI person is the right descriptor. I think you're absolutely right. Jen.
I would say one thing when we talk about white women and white male proximity. I think so. One of the things I did in 2023 is I made the move from talking about race and sport to conflict and culture. And one of the reasons why I did that was, can y'all hear my fan? Sorry, it's like on turbo right now. Okay, I'm like, my house might fly away. I don't know. But so the reason why I jumped to conflict and culture is because I felt like people really didn't have a baseline skill set of how to navigate conflict. And because they don't have a baseline skill set to navigate conflict, they can't push forward DEI. If you're not prepared to grapple with people on these topics, you're not going to be able to push it forward. And so I say that And I think the thing when we talk about white women is that a lot of them are taught that if they sit silently next to their white male partners, they will be lifted up with them equally. They are taught that if I'm silent, if I just allow him to be racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever it is, that we will rise together. Because, right, their moms have told them proximity will keep you close. Not realizing proximity is going to drag you along like a dog on a leash. That's all it's going to do. And it's going to be used against them. And so when we talk about like these topics about like affirmative action or, right, like they're willing to sit there, it's because in reality, that's what's taught. How many times have they been taught to keep the peace, right? Just don't say anything. Your grandpa's old, your dad, this and that. Don't say anything, keep the peace. So forever, they're taught this idea of keep the peace. So then whenever you have a Black woman like me or a Black woman like Michelle who comes and says, we're not keeping the peace, we're going to rip the scab open and we're going to talk about these things. They are scared shitless because they've never had the skills to do that. They've always been told, if you sit quietly and keep the peace, you will rise like the tide, not being dragged along like a tugboat. And so we see kind of this assault on DEI is also, to me, is in some ways assaults on white families, because now they have to reconcile that the things that are being said are problematic and very harmful. And now that their eyes are open, they have to do something about it. And that's the one thing that people are afraid to do, is they're afraid to say something and do something. Thanksgiving and the holidays, hey, just keep the peace. Grandpa's not going to be alive for long. Uncle Mark's only here for the day. Just keep the peace, keep the peace, keep the peace, which means stay silent and see and hear all these really harmful things so that the family could stay together in a nice family moment. And so that's where the assault is also happening, is that we're asking them to redefine what it means to be in family and to say things to people that you love.
That's absolutely right, Jen. It's really, I love your metaphor there. And it's really interesting to me to see who is expected to keep the peace, right? And who was allowed to say things that would harm the peace, right? I think that's really, really interesting. And I'm wondering if we could just shift the conversation just a little bit and bring this into sport. And I'm wondering if we could talk about, and I want to go back to you, Jen, about, how does that keeping the peace, what does that look like in sport, especially college sport?
It's hard. These athletes, they are willing to protest. They're talking about stuff in numerous ways. I don't know if we can keep the peace like we did before. Now, right, back in the day, you had to get pre-2015, you had to get your coaches okay to be able to transfer. Remember? And a coach could be like, you're not going to go to these schools because we play them in 3 years. You're not going to go to this school because it's within 200 feet. You're not. And so you only can go to 3 schools. And coaches wielded so much power that athletes had to be silent. And now with the transfer portal and NIL, athletes can be like, I'm going to go somewhere else where I can be vocal and speak up. And I think what I see a lot right now within college athletics is worried about donors and sponsors and saying, let's be quiet just because we have to have the revenue shares coming in, NIL money. And so I think the thing is that one of the reasons I started speaking was because when Colin Kaepernick kneeled, all of my coaching friends were like, we don't know what to do. We're afraid to get fired if we kneeled or athletes kneel. There was a big fear because everyone, right, like we look back and we're like, that was it. But like everyone was so fearful. And so that's why I came in. And so to me, it's not about keeping the peace anymore. It's how do we give people really good conflict skills to navigate the hard situations and the hard questions and the hard pushback, because that's what we're going to have to do. We can't keep the peace. These athletes they are so wonderful. They're reading, they're educating themselves. They know so much stuff. We no longer, because we're uncomfortable with the conversation, telling them to be quiet because they're just going to go to social media. They're just going to talk about it in all these different ways that coaches don't have control of. So what does it look like? Instead of saying the absence of conflict is harmony, instead of saying we're going to be grappling with this stuff, but how do we give people skills to have the real and hard conversation, to know that there sometimes isn't an end, but a continued conversation?
Howard, in your experience, where did you see examples of folks keeping the peace, not keeping the peace? How did this come out at you?
Yeah, well, I think keeping the peace is I look at things like NIL and recent reforms. I look at those as efforts as towards keeping the peace. And what I mean by that is that, when I think about DEI in college sports, the reality is that inequity is built into the core of NCAA sports. Because amateurism is at the core, and the amateur model itself, has been historically and continues to be a system of exploitation with demonstrable elements of anti-Blackness embedded within the very structure. So, and this isn't theoretical. We have extensive research documenting these patterns of exploitation through amateurism, the link between amateurism and anti-Blackness. So, with amateurism being at the center of college athletics, to me, anything that is done that is short of, and I don't want to get too radical or political on here, but like short of, I don't say abolishing amateurism, but directly addressing this system of inequity that is at the crux of college athletics, anything short of that is window dressing, is to keep the peace, but not really getting to the core. Because the reality is, college athletics generates billions of dollars, largely through the labor and talents of Black athletes or diverse athletes. But when we look at who holds the power, it's the athletic directors, the head coaches, the conference commissioners, the presidents, and we see disparities even amongst those folks who hold power in terms of representation. So that can't be explained by merit alone. There's glass ceilings firmly in place in athletics. So DEI work in college sports is not just about representation, it's about actually implementing checks and balances against these long-standing systems of exploitation, again, that are very clearly documented. It's about ensuring opportunities to resources, to the benefits that are generated by college sports and distributing them equitably. It's about questioning why certain paths to leadership remain consistently narrow for some groups, despite diverse talent pools. So without intentional DEI efforts, and like I said, it's really about the foundation of college sports and where the inequities flow from that foundation of amateurism and other things. But without the intentional DEI efforts, we are only going to continue to perpetuate a system where the most valuable participants, the laborers generating the money, don't receive proportional benefits to the other stakeholders, which includes having wealth, health, and educational opportunities extracted from them along their path in the higher ed institution. So DEI is absolutely necessary and crucial in college sports for the ethical, sustainable future. But I bring in the question of, is there even such a thing as an ethical, sustainable future for college sports if it's built on a system of exploitation?
Thank you, Howard. And you're pushing us toward the next question. And at the same time, I want to get Michelle's thoughts on that keep the peace thing as well. And then we'll jump toward where Howard has taken us.
Okay, it's like I said, keep the peace. I'm a product of HBCU. And when you talk about college sports and you talk about equity, HBCUs are at the bottom of that. Like I said, I'm here in Atlanta, where we're going to have the Celebration Bowl on Saturday, where the top MEAC, the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, and the SWAC, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, were our champions, where we crowned the HBCU champions. This is the thing, we have to carve our own space. And at HBCUs, please let me let you know that the HBCUs have never kept the peace. When we go back to the civil rights movements, when we go back to the inception of all of HBCUs, we were built on protest and inequality. And it hasn't changed with athletics. If you look at the NFL, actually, the NFL is built on the backs of HBCUs. The First Stars, the Night Train Lanes, the David Deacon Joneses, they were all HBCU products. They were HBCU athletes. And HBCUs, like I said, if you think if HBCUs had some of the funding that I'll just say North Carolina has the most HBCUs, and it has the largest in North Carolina A&T. Universities, HBCUs across the country have had to sue their states for underfunding for generations. for generations, and they're getting these monies, and they're now just now helping. And I'm going to take it just a step further, keeping the peace. Deion Sanders. Let me talk to Deion Sanders. This man had the skills to be a college coach at any university. And he chose to go, and his own alma mater, which is also mine, Florida State, did not want to give him that opportunity. Okay, even though he had worked as he was doing television broadcasting, but he was also coaching Pop Warner, Pee Wee High School. He went to Jackson State University, and I'm sorry, but white folks, y'all had never heard of Jackson. Unless you lived in the South off of I-20 somewhere, you had never heard of Jackson State University. And as soon as he turned a program around, he took that program and he didn't keep the peace while he was changing the course of his career and his life and his students' life. He had everybody bought into Jackson State, and he did, and he gave and delivered. And then who came knocking? Well, as usual, who comes knocking to HBCUs to take the black bodies? University of Colorado, one of the whitest schools I've ever been to in my life. University of Colorado comes knocking on the door. And you know why they needed Deion Sanders? They needed Deion Sanders because they couldn't recruit black athletes. Very few black athletes. Now you have the Chauncey Billups who went there, and Cordell Stewarts. You've had successful Eric Bieniemy. You've had successful black athletes, but there has been a long time discourse of trouble recruiting black athletes to the University of Colorado, not just because it wasn't about the school, it was about the city. It was about the city. Once again, you love our black bodies when we're out there putting them on the line, but you don't want us in the city. You don't want black bodies in the city. Black people can't afford to keep the peace. We keep the peace, then we die. We can't afford to. We have to always be shaking things up. People of color in general, because I'll say I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my brothers and sisters, Mexicans in New Mexico, had to, it's like to get the things that they needed, they had to shake it up and make people say, look, this is ours. This was all Mexico all the way up to Oregon. This was, from Veracruz, from southern Mexico all the way up to Oregon was Mexico, and it was Mexicans and indigenous people, and they had to and as they were getting their lands taken away from them, and as they were getting their things, they had to shake things up, and that's like I said, and it's the same way as black people. We had to shake things up. We cannot afford to be quiet. It's not something that we can afford to do. So bringing it back to sports, like I said, Deion Sanders went to Colorado. And people you hated Deion Sanders, but he said he did what he said he was going to do, and he never kept the peace while he was doing it. He was as arrogant as he has ever been. He was prime. He has been Coach Prime all the time. And now look at the stadium when nobody even, like I said, nobody wanted to. You didn't even think about the University of Colorado as being viable for any sport. Now the stadiums are filled. You've got celebrities coming through there. It is Colorado Springs is now the blackest stop in the Big 12 to see a college football game, all because of him. But also, trying not to keep the peace but still, you still have those people and those structures trying to tear down what this man built. Travis Hunter and Shadur. Travis Hunter was kept off of I want to say it was Jim Thorpe Award. This kid is transitional when it comes to sport. He is a unicorn, and he's been transitional, and he didn't make the final of the Jim Thorpe Award. He should be this coming up, I think, next weekend. He should be the Heisman Trophy winner. How do you even keep him off the fight if you don't want to make him the winner? But how do you keep him off the finals? That's where it's like I said, every person, the Stephen A. Smiths and the Keyshawn Johnsons and anybody who calls themselves to be a black journalist should say, this is what we're raging against. We're not saying you have to give them the award, but you can't tell me that this young man didn't belong in the finals. And that's the thing. We have to keep rattling these cages no matter what. We cannot afford to keep the peace because our silence equals death.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And with that in mind, the idea of keeping the peace or not, I love the way you said that at the end, rattling the cages. With that in mind, with what Howard talked about in terms of inequality is built into the core of college sport, with the prominence now of NIL and the transfer portal, I think those are important to look at around ideas of race, gender, class, sexuality, and all the other protected classes. Let's put this question on the table, and this I think will help us continue this piece of the conversation. Why is DEI, the framework, the systems, the structures, necessary in college sports?
Yeah, and Bruce, I want to jump back in. You know, speaking of the rattle in the cage that Dr. Richardson is talking about, and I guess that's the perspective that I was talking about from, like, folks are rattling the cage. You know, we've seen athletes and others, you know, we've seen these major court cases and lead to reform. And that rattling of the cage, it has mattered. You know, folks stepping up and taking a stance, it has mattered. And what I see and what I was speaking to is the keeping the peace now from the other side of, like, of the institution of the NCAA and of college sports, saying, man, folks are demanding more, are demanding better, are demanding equitable treatment in some capacity. What can we give? How can we give in? So now we're about to see the very start of revenue sharing for the first time. To me, that is an admission that this whole thing is so wrong, is so exploitative. And again, that exploitation is not race neutral. It's very clearly tracked of how we got here, and who's being exploited. And so I think because of that rattling of the cage, which is going to continue, we see the NCAA year after year now, from NIL to Alston to revenue sharing. Now they're trying to say, well, man, how can we hold on to our power? But we got to give a little bit because, you know, it's clear this whole thing has been wrong and unfair and exploitative. And I'll stop with that.
Dr. Fry.
I think Howard explained it well. I don't have anything to really say on this part.
Cool. Thank you. Michelle.
And I'm gonna say definitely, like I said, these systems, but also actually we've kind of talked about male sports. Let's not forget, but the women. It's like, because this is the thing, the men, they're always being taken care of. I mean, when you talk about these NIL deals, it's mostly talking about a Shedeur Sanders. It's talking about a Travis Hunter, Arch Manning. We were talking about how much Arch Manning made, and Arch Manning never started a game last year. He never started a game. He's a bench warmer, but he was offered more money than the starting quarterback. But then we have to talk about, when we talk about this DEI, the one thing about rattling that cage is we're getting these things for the women athletes as well now. Remember, was it about 3-4 years ago when they had the women's national championship at the Alamo Dome, and the young ladies, they got the little pink weights that, you know, the little pink weights, and they had to basically embarrass the NCAA to say, this is not like this, you know. Then, you know, they clipped over to their men. This is what the men have, and this is what we have. It's like, this looks like a bad Motel 6 gym, you know. Rattling these cages got these women what they wanted. The WNBA, I want to say the WNBA Players Association, rattling those cages. The WNBA has, like I said, I'm so proud of those women and the putting themselves out there, and making sure, and the way they're rattling the cage, they're not just rattling for women, they're rattling for everyone. They took the stand, you know, like under George Floyd, they took the stand before the men did. The men were like, they were sitting around figuring out what to do, and the women were like, this is what's being done. So let's not forget about the women when we start as we move on in our discussion.
Can I actually add on to Michelle?
Please do.
Think what we're going to see that's going to be really interesting is we're going to see some type of oppression Olympics and people trying to keep what they want. And so what I mean by that is, when we're talking about revenue sharing, what we're starting to see is we're seeing the work of Black men being pitted against what women don't get. And so we're going to see a lot of pitting people against each other to try and have the folks that weren't included in winning jump up to win. Because if we pit these two groups against each other, right? If we're like, well, why should the women get X amount of money? They haven't been a part of making revenue, and it should be this group. And we're seeing this pitting of people, when the reality, I firmly believe in, and I'll fight anyone in here in Baltimore about it, I believe that men's sports as a whole has only been able to be as successful as it is because women's sports have been silenced the whole time. When you're not able to have women's sport pro leagues, of course men's leagues are going to be outshining, right? Of course, those things are happening when we have to have Title IX just for women's sports to be able to get some type of money, but many schools are still not abiding by Title IX. Of course, it's going to allow men's sports to level up. And so we really have to think about that, especially when they talk about the NBA and the WNBA. They're like, well, look, 27 years in, the WNBA is still having to be on the coattails of the men. It's like, but yes, if you compare 27-year-old NBA when they were about to be bankrupt to 27-year-old women's NBA, we have to compare apples to apples. And that's what people are not thinking about. They're comparing the systems and the teams that have 50, 60 years on women's sports, and we're trying to army crawl our way up to success. And so when you're thinking about what Title IX was in the 70s, how much men's sports were able to elevate because women's sports weren't able to get anything. So when we think about this big picture of DEI and revenue sharing and NIL contracts, we have to situate how women's sports have been having to army crawl themselves to get not even parallel, but to be close. I mean, I think the data, I believe Julie sent it to me, we were talking about like, it was like football gets like 70%, men's basketball gets like 15, women's basketball gets 12, and then all the Olympic sports need to go out like as if they're in the Roman Colosseum and fight each other for like a small percent. And that just perpetuates the harm because these other sports haven't been able to have these main stages. Like you said, Michelle, it was only 3-4 years ago where women's basketball couldn't even use the Sweet 16. They couldn't use Elite 8. They weren't getting TV contracts. All these things that were stumbling blocks. Women's volleyball right now has prime time, and you see what's happening. Women's basketball is getting prime time. You see what's happening. Women's softball. I mean, the amount of people that watch the Women's World Series, that's what we're seeing whenever you're giving people opportunity. And so that has to be centered to me in the conversation of DEI and the conversation of revenue sharing. Who has not got the opportunities? And what does that mean with money that they're still owed to try and get those opportunities? Because the reality of it is that if they cut the Department of Education, they cut Title IX, guess who's going to be on the first chopping block? It's going to be women's sports.
I think that's right, Jen. And I think this is a good spot to get to one of the questions that's in the Q&A. And someone asked this, I would love if Dr. Richardson could elaborate a bit more on womanism versus feminism. This person hasn't heard of this before and would love to hear more. Michelle, can you talk a little bit about that?
Womanism was created by Alice Walker. And it was basically talking about how Black women, we are invisible. We are invisible. And so we can't, it's like the feminism, we can't be there because it's like we can't be feminist because feminist is basically white women saying, look at me. I'm trying to put it in plain, simple terms. You can say, look at me, look at me. But Black women, we have been invisible since we came to, as enslaved persons, as we came to this country, we've been invisible. We worked in people's homes, we were invisible. We did all these jobs and we were invisible. Feminism is saying, come over here and be like us. I can't be like you. Because once again, as we said earlier on in the practices, you're a woman but you're white first. You will always bank on your whiteness before you bank on your womanness. Black women are always going, we always have to be, it doesn't matter Black or woman, we're still looked at as less. I tell my students in a minute, I said, if you lined up a whole wall of women, I said, they're never going to, I said, and you ask who's the doctor, they're never going to point to me first. And when you tell somebody I'm a Black woman and I'm a doctor, nobody, Jen, you probably get this, like I said, people get surprised. Oh, you're a doctor? Oh my goodness. But they would never do that with a white woman. And so that's what I mean by womanist. I am focused on my womanist, my womanism or my womanness. Because as a Black woman, that's what I have to do. I can't focus on my white women. As I said, you will sit on the bench. You would rather sit on the bench, or as you said, in proximity to white maleness. Me sitting on the proximity to white maleness will be diminished, much like Kamala Harris was. Well, she slept her way. She slept her way to the, she slept her way to the top. So I'm sorry, I know that's kind of a confounding description, but I was trying to put it in a more of a plain situation. But if you look up Alice Walker coined the phrase womanism.
Can I add into you, Michelle?
Yes.
So one of the tenets also about feminism was like gender equality and the ability to work. The problem with that is that Black women were the ones who were already working and watching the white women's babies, so then they could go picket to work. And so some of the things that under feminism that they were fighting for, Black women were already doing, but they weren't considered equal as, they were considered more or less than. And so the womanism kind of is all aspects, race, gender, sex, like every aspect of it, and coming up for a woman, as opposed to feminism, which has the tenets for white women.
And I should have made it more simple. Like I said, white women didn't, it's like this, white women didn't, they wanted these things. They want to have these careers, but they also want to be taken care of. It's like they also want to be taken care of in the sense of the patriarchy. That's why I look at white feminism. That is strictly my opinion, because that's what I've run into. That is what I've run into and that's why I say I don't prescribe to feminism. You know, the whole now movement and everything. Black women, we've been working outside the house, once again, since the moment we came to this country as enslaved people. We've done all these things that you say you want to do, but it's like, you voted for, it was like white suffragists, they voted for Black men to get the vote before Black women, thinking that they would get the vote. If you give Black men the vote, then white women will in turn get the vote. And then once Black men got the vote, white women still did not get the vote. But Black women are always put to the back of feminism.
Somewhere in that conversation is the idea of intersectionality. And I think that's where Jim, or both you and Michelle are heading with that. Is that accurate to you?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different route for a second here and talk about DEI professionals. I consider myself a DEI professional, and I'm wondering if you all could talk about, assuming that you use that descriptor for yourselves, what does it mean to be a DEI professional, especially in the sport context? Howard, can you start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think being a DEI professional can mean a lot of things. I'm kind of torn with my answer here, what I really want to say. Part of the reason is, so on the one hand, I want to say, being a DEI professional means you have a part of your formal role advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within an organization, whether it's an entry-level position, an executive, a VP, that scope and authority may vary, but DEI professionals are tasked with advancing DEI within an organization. But I think you can obviously make a claim that, if my formal role doesn't have that, but we have a DEI committee at work and it started because of me and I push all the DEI initiatives and et cetera, I think that person would consider themselves a DEI professional. And then lastly, I heard Dr. Damon Williams a few years ago, or actually about a year ago, speak at NADIHE, the Association for Diversity Officers in Higher Ed, and he talked about formalizing a profession and the things that it takes to formalize a profession. And one of the things, or a few of the things that he's cited were a professional organization. So he said, like, that's why NADIHE is so important, a professional organization. Another thing that he cited, and this might be a little controversial, is formal certification. So to be a lawyer, to be an HR professional, to be whatever it is. And so like looking at HR, you don't have to have a certification to work in HR, but there is a professional body, SHRM or HRCI, and there are these certifications that exist. He was pointing to these things as tenets of what formalizes a profession and really strengthens it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But that said, I think being a DEI professional can mean a lot because many of us are either currently or got our start in DEI work at our job, but that wasn't our title when we started.
Michelle, you want to add?
Is it DEI professionals? My thing is with DEI professionals, it was so much. It came, it kind of came in like just like this blazing fire where everybody was hiring these DEI professionals and they hadn't even had a title for them. I mean, they hadn't even had a job description for them yet.
Mm.
And early on, I'll be honest with you, I pushed away from it because really it became code for get a black woman in here to manage these black athletes. So I kind of pushed away from it. I think as we've evolved, you've had people like Dr. Akila Carter-Francique writing articles on it. We've had, Jen has written on it. We've had many women writing articles on DEI and how it goes to sports now. And I think now it's more proactive. It's not just this title. You can't just say, oh, well, I'm about diversity, equity, inclusion, because now you have to say, well, what programming are you doing behind this? How are you moving this forward? And I'm kind of, which is disappointing because as it was really just starting, this wave was really starting to take off. We had all of these defeats in the federal courts. As it was moving and people were kind of moving with it. We've had these defeats in the federal courts, and now people are taking the things out of the college admissions. I love that just recently, the Naval Academy won the right to keep DEI in their admissions, which I think is wonderful. But like I said, it's like so to be known as a DEI practitioner, you can't just say it. It's not a cute title you can use anymore. It's now really about what are you doing to move this forward? What are you doing, as we said, and we kind of, like I said, kind of put it into racial form, but what are you doing to help persons with abilities? What are you do? What are, with disabilities, excuse me, how do you include persons with disabilities, age, as you said, race, gender, sexuality? How do you move this forward? How do you move these initiatives forward to make everybody in this place? We'll say a college. This is a public college. This is not a private secular college. This is a public institution where people pay tax dollars, where their tax dollars go to keep this thing afloat. How do we make the persons who come here feel like they have a safe place? And this is a place where they can learn and thrive and grow.
Thank you, Michelle. Jen.
Yeah, I would say, I don't consider myself a DEI professional anymore. Whenever I went to the intersection of conflict and culture, I kind of stepped away from that because I truly feel like you can't do excellent DEI work unless you don't understand conflict. If you don't understand conflict, you'll never be able to do DEI work because DEI work is inherently confrontational. You're asking people to change themselves and to change systems in ways that maybe they've never done that before. So I feel like maybe I'm adjacent. My goal is to prepare people so well with conflict skills that they're able to push forward DEI really well. That being said, I feel like to be a DEI professional means that your goal within this is to keep the vulnerable safe and to teach others how to keep the vulnerable safe. And vulnerable can be a wide spectrum of disability, gender identity, sexual identity. The spectrum is wide, and also depends on where you're at. It might mean that if you're at an urban school, it's keeping the rural safe. So it's keeping the vulnerable safe and then teaching others to do it. Because what tends to happen is that the DEI professional comes into this position and it's like, okay, you're here. Here's everything on your shoulders. You're responsible for keeping everyone safe and developing programming. And the real goal of a DEI professional is that they are teaching others the skills and the competencies to keep vulnerable people safe, the wide spectrum of it, and that they're able to develop the strategies, they're able to develop just whatever is needed in the whole umbrella of keeping vulnerable people safe so that people have the actual skills in numerous ways to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Those answers are all brilliant, and I appreciate that thoughtfulness. I want to pick up on something that Michelle said earlier about the defeats in federal courts. And a lot of us who do DEI work are starting to say, we can see people writing about this, and it's been happening for some time now. We're starting to say that DEI is dead, right? And I'm wondering if you could talk about the evidence that DEI is dead, if you think it is or if it's not, and how that evidence might be appearing in college sports. Michelle, you want to grab onto that?
Yeah, DEI is not dead. Okay, it like I said, it's still it's just got to fight a little bit harder, but it's not dead, because it's kind of like this. Once you've tasted freedom, you're never going back. You're never going back. And can you repeat the question for me one more time, just so I'm very clear on what I'm answering?
Yeah, I'll try to make it clear for you. What is the evidence that DEI is dead, if there is any, and how does that evidence appear in college sports?
Well, like I said, it's not dead, because as I said, if it were dead, a Deion Sanders would not be in Colorado. If DEI, I'll be honest with you, somebody had to say, because schools like Colorado that are very, they're very into the, that's very, and if you know Colorado Springs, that is very white and very wealthy. That's a very wealthy area. So they can say, we don't want that guy here. If DEI was, somebody had to say, look, you want to still keep being the laughing stock of all college sports? Do you want to still do this, or do we basically want to ride this black man and his fame and his popularity to the top? And give, but you said, but this is where the excuse me, yeah, Boulder, my apologies, Colorado Springs, I'm thinking of Air Force Academy, but equally as white, okay. but somebody had to say, this is what's best. When somebody had to say, this is what's best for the university, that's where that DEI comes in. This is what's best for the university. DEI, where you see now also in the MEAC and in the SWAC, their games they're getting, like I said, last year LSU came to Coppin State University. Coppin didn't go to LSU. LSU came to Coppin State University and played. And that came from the coaches, because we understand money games and stuff like that. But Kim, you get Kim Mulkey. She came to West Baltimore. She brought her team to West Baltimore, to a small HBCU in West Baltimore, and played and gave the players and treated the players and the coaches and the university with the respect, because knowing that, yes, they don't, Coppin State, we don't have a facility like they play at in LSU, or even just across the way at the College Park at University of Maryland College Park. But these women and these coaches put in the work just like my students do, and I want to help raise the awareness of these young women. I want to raise the awareness of Coppin State University and HBCUs. And once again, also giving a shout out to Dawn Staley, who's been, who I think Dawn Staley, God, NCAA, you should thank your lucky stars for this woman, because she's really quietly doing the work on the women's side. She's saying, she's making a noise, but she's really not, I don't know how to say it. She's going out of her way, but she's making it look very effortless. She's making it look very effortless. Like, look, hey, I'm going to go call Coppin, because actually Coppin went to South Carolina. I'm going to call Coppin State. I'm going to go and bring them down here because it play. And it's not coming just for a paycheck. She's really trying to, and she's investing in not just the players and the school getting a paycheck. She's actually investing in the coaches. From the very first championship she won, she's been invested in the black women coaches. When she won her first championship, Dawn Staley sent a piece of the net to every black coach in the NCAA, in NCAA Division I, to say, because Carolyn Peck had done it for her, gave her a piece. And Carolyn Peck said, once you win, I want my piece of the net back.
That's right.
And so, like I said, so my thing is, it's not dead. Because like I said, just recently, we had Arizona State come to Coppin State University. How many times do you get programs on that level from these Power 5 conferences? They'll bring an HBCU to their school and beat them down. But how many times do they come actually to that school? To me, that's the step in the right direction. And so, as I said, it's not dead. We're just, like I said, it's in a new place, in a new space. Like I said, this is that transitional time, like from when the civil rights movement, when it went from the civil rights movement of our parents into into our grandparents, to the Black Panther movement of our parents. It's just another chapter in the struggle.
I think you're right, Michelle, and I want to say two things. One, I would have loved to have been in on the conversation between Angel Reese and Kim Mulkey. Angel Reese as a Baltimore native, when they talked about coming to West Baltimore to play that game. And I'll say this as well. Dawn Staley was presented with an award by the Drake Group at our 2023 symposium for all the work that you're talking about. She's a phenomenal, phenomenal person. Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about your perspective on DEI being dead or not?
Yeah, I think the first thing about it is that now we have to start controlling the language and controlling power. I think that's a really big thing, is that we've seen what happens when language is taken out of our hands, that we're sitting there trying to grapple with it. So I think the first thing is how do we start controlling the language of what we're talking about and how we're talking about it? I think the second thing when we talk about DEI is dead. I think the 2020 the 2020 version is.
Mhm.
I think the 2020 version is. And the old saying, they tried to bury us, they did not know we were the seeds. And so I think that we need to look at 2020, right, as something that they're trying to scorch the earth with. How do we use that as seeds that have been buried and we've been watering, that we're able to grow into different ways? Because a part of that way, we have to understand with this new administration coming in, the next 4 years might just be about protection to people's jobs, protection to people's departments, protections of people's mental health. That this 4 years might just solely be about protection. And if we think about some plants that when they're dormant, they're still alive, they're just dormant for a period. And we might just need that time to be dormant so that we can protect ourselves to rebuild. And so that's why I think about 2020 DI. Yeah, that is dead. And that doesn't mean that there weren't some great seeds planted that are going to allow us to grow in phenomenal ways, because now we have a better understanding of what we need to do against attack. I think that when 2020 happened, we didn't have a full understanding. We didn't think the pendulum was going to swing as bad as it did, and to protect ourselves. And now we're able to kind of gather to the troops, rest, protect, so that we can charge forward.
I think that's really interesting, Jen, and I want to spend just a couple more seconds on that piece. I think it's a really interesting way to frame it, that the 2020 version of DEI might be dead. And it seems like, based on what we said earlier about that 2020 version being a direct response to a couple of high-profile incidents, an organization said, well, you know what, I need to jump on this bandwagon. Would it be correct, I guess, to say that maybe it's a good thing that that version of DEI is dead? Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing or other, because I think that there were some good positive things that came out of that. I think the reality of it is that I look at it from a conflict lens, and I realize and I see that organizations aren't really as bold and willing to grapple and step up as they try and say that they are.
That's right.
Because when you make some of these statements, when you're standing alone, you got to be ready to have your chest out. And I think it showed us that a lot of people, even though they might say it, are not truly willing to have their chest out. And lastly, I don't think that they realize how much money is in the Black communities. I think by far they think like the amount of money we spend on shoes, baby, if y'all can see my closet down there, like we spend money we spend our money, and they don't think about that. So when they're afraid they're going to lose sponsorships, when they're afraid they're going to lose donors, they're not thinking that we could fill the void. They think that they're going to lose it and it's going to be gone forever. And so I think that kind of rounds out to me is that this aspect of understanding that we can step up and fill the void as long as we know that you're willing to stand up there and grapple and take the hits with us.
Absolutely right. The Black boycott is real and effective.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Jen, they want our money. I'm sorry, Carter. They want our money. They'll let us buy Nike shoes till we, till we can't choke on another pair of Air Jordans, done over 40 different times. They want our money. But what I'm saying, to go on what you said, it's like, once again, we have to start supporting. We have to start supporting Black entrepreneurs and Black businesses. Like I said, I love like Killer Mike. Killer Mike, that dude, that guy is so dope. Where he's saying it's like you grew up, it's like support these brands. Don't just, these black owned or minority owned brands, these queer owned brands. Take away the power from a Walmart. Let them know it's like, you know what? Hey, you know what? You're not the only grocery store in town. I've got this over here. So don't try me. Don't try me at all. It's like I said, so they want our dollars. They just don't want our voice. Like I said, I saw a Walmart commercial with Busta Rhymes on it. I never thought I'd ever see Busta Rhymes on a Walmart commercial.
I might have to check that one out, man.
But and you've got and as Walmart basically is tapping the black folks, they have Busta Rhymes and they do a Love Jones with Lorenz Tate and Nia Long, tapping into that black culture. So it's like they want our money. They just don't want, and they'll use our bodies, but they really don't want to. But as far as being equal, once I give you the paycheck for doing whatever you did, I don't want to hear from you anymore.
Hey, Michelle, can we hear from Howard real quick? I'd love to hear, kind of bounce off.
My apologies.
Thank you, Jen.
Howard.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate that. And we've hit this question really well. I do want to add that, I completely agree. There's no, I was about to say hip hop's not dead, because when I was preparing for this question, I was thinking about the Nas album from 20 years ago. Hip hop is dead. It's impossible. Hip hop will never die. Same thing with DEI. DEI will never die. And I want to take it a step further, just really briefly. I feel like I get in a lot of arguments with folks or debates with folks about DEI, and people always push back on this, what I'm about to say. But it's that, well, number one, when people is DEI dead? I don't even know what DEI means. That's a lot of times what I come back with. What do you mean by DEI? What are you referring to? Because I believe that everyone actually supports DEI. Everyone, whether they know it or not. And what I mean by that is when we look at certain aspects of DEI work, like ADA accommodations and disability support, just to park it there, there's a broad consensus that that's necessary and it's valuable. I never hear anybody seriously argue that we should eliminate accessibility requirements and reasonable accommodations, that we should that we shouldn't invest in a wheelchair ramp at an elementary school or I never hear anybody make those arguments. So to me, DEI as a framework, it won't ever die, but the pushback against DEI becomes apparent when we're focusing on specific populations. It's like I said earlier. So when we're talking about addressing inequities about Black folks, about ethnic minorities, LGBTQ plus individuals, women, this is when the selective resistance that fuels the narrative around the death of DEI. But I see it as a selective resistance, and it goes back to that deliberate mischaracterization of what DEI means. And lastly, to answer the second part of the question, what does that look like in athletics? Well, at the last institution that I was at, Oregon State University, my alma mater, I have 2 degrees from there. I've worked there as an employee in 2 different stints. Diehard Beaver fan, love Oregon State. But there's concerning evidence of institutional retreat from DEI commitments when it comes to athletics. So when I resigned from my position as Chief Diversity Officer in the athletic department, the role was eliminated rather than being filled. That suggests an institutional deprioritization of formal DEI leadership in athletics. But eliminating positions doesn't eliminate the need for the work. And so to me, we're not seeing a death of DEI, but an intense political and cultural backlash against specific elements of DEI work. And it really, in a lot of ways, comes down to who is benefiting from the quote unquote DEI work. And that is at the crux of where we're finding the backlash, in my opinion.
Thank you, Howard. I appreciate that. And that kind of gets us to the next subject of the conversation here. And I want to note that we've got about 10 minutes left in our time together. And I want to talk about what DEI work looks like in sports at the institutions you've been a part of, or the institutions that you watched, reviewed, been connected to in some way. And I think one way to get at that is to answer a question that came through the Q&A. And it asks, how can we best support athletes that are standing up to the assault on DEI, accessibility, and et cetera, especially in states that are legislating and criminalizing that kind of activity? So what can we do to help those athletes? Michelle?
I said, make sure that, like I said, if they're going to put themselves out there, to make sure that, like I said, when it really gets hot, that somebody's got their back. I've been at different institutions. I have taught at HBCUs, Research One institutions, Pac-12, and mid-major PWI institutions. And the thing is, when a kid speaks up, because like I said, especially being that young, it's scary. You know, we're older now, you know, we're all of a certain age that it doesn't scare us as much as it did when we were in our 20s. We realize that we're strong in it. But when a young person is speaking up for the first time and their voice is cracking and their knees are getting a little weak, there has to be people there. There has to be the elders there standing behind them going, we got you. And then when it gets hot, not to abandon them for the sake of your paycheck. Because my thing is, you know, I feel like, you know, I told a student, got in my face one time at one of the universities and told me, watch out, I can get you fired. I said, sweetheart, I used to clean toilets for a living. I'll never go hungry. What you gonna do?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, you know. I mean, Michelle, and I want to know a little bit more about what it means to have their back. And I'm gonna throw that question at Jen.
Yes.
And I think some of this came from the question from the audience member came from your comment about protecting the vulnerable. So protecting the vulnerable in what way?
So I think a few different things. I think getting them to be really good at documenting things. So if they go and have a conversation with a staff member or athletic director, make sure to tell them to document it and send an email. So document who was in the room, what they talked about, all that. I think the second thing is teaching them when they are advocating, protesting, whatever it is, to be very specific in their wants. Because what tends to happen is they'll go with very general stuff that's easy to be ignored. We want more diverse coaches. Boo-boo, what does that mean? Like how can we actually do yes or no, this has been done? And so make it very specific, because they come with general stuff. And say, for instance, they have a coaching staff that only has one Black coach. Well, if they get a second Black coach, now they've upped it 50%. Are they done? So being very specific in what they want with their details. I think the next thing is to give timelines on things. So not, because we know colleges are great with saying, we'll just start a committee. The goal with the committee is to make sure that that athlete graduates, and now the committee automatically dissolves. Ta-da! And so with that is to give timelines on when you want things. What exactly do you want? I think the next and last part, again, is to teach them how to navigate this stuff. As Michelle said, this is scary. This is stuff they're not taught. Their words are going to shake. They're going to be very nervous about it. How do we teach them to go to talk to people who have power over them about these hard topics, to stay on task? To stay on task. Well, Howard, we bought you all a new locker room. I understand that, Dr. Kroom, but we're not talking about that right now. What we are talking about is and to pay attention to the pivots and the things that can occur in the conversation, to take it off topic. Now it's been off topic for 45 minutes. Sorry, I gotta go. And now the meeting never happens again. But first, keep them to know that these are my talking points. And no matter which way I'm thrown, I'm staying on these talking points to make sure that we hit on them, and to teach them those skills. Because what happens is that they'll mention something and it's able to pull them off topic. And now the main thing of maybe we don't get equitable per diems, that's pulled away, because now they can talk about the new stadium and the $150 million on that. And now this never gets talked about again. So to really have the skills to stay on task and to hit the talking points, to then document it and to give timelines.
Thanks, Jen. Howard, you've done this work. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you help athletes take good care of themselves in the way that Jen and Michelle are both talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my answer to that is going to kind of relate back. I just wanted to add to the last point, and I'll relate it to taking good care of yourself, is every single thing that my colleagues just said. Jen just gave some real practical advice for here's how we can set them up for success. And I just want to add to that. Also, let's not have them be the only ones with this passion and this energy and the agenda to push things forward. They shouldn't be the only ones with talking points. There should be a system. That's why you're in that role. That's why you have that job. And that's why you're in this webinar. Like you should be working to advance this stuff. Dr. Richardson talked rattling the cage. Whatever that looks like for you, but it should not be the student athlete being the only one to do that. So they should be doing that with all the talking points that we just talked about, all that guidance in an environment where there's at least one professional that's on that same type of energy that they're on, and that this is not the first time administration, et cetera, is hearing this, because you've already been in those rooms advocating as well. And so in terms of self-care, you know, I would say for me, I don't have like an elaborate self-care routine that I could even that I could suggest, other than keeping perspective, trying not to get too high and too low. But that goes a little bit counterintuitive because we're gonna get real high and real low because this stuff is real and it's important and it's real lives. Um, but keep in perspective that it's our problem, it's not our fault, but it's our problem. We have to keep the energy moving forward, and we can't be personally responsible for every outcome and keep the weight of the world on our shoulders, but we have to persist. So keeping a good perspective.
I appreciate all of those comments, and we are really close to the bottom of the hour when this thing, when our pumpkin, our carriage turns back into a pumpkin. So, I want to ask this final question for you all. What do you have to share with us as concluding thoughts, things that we want to take home? There's one thing we could take home from this webinar. What would it be? We'll start with Howard.
Wow, that's a tough one. You know, we had a couple of questions that we kicked around in pre-production, and one of those that really stands out to me, there was a question about, you know, with this new super conferences, with revenue sharing, with all of this new stuff that's on the horizon, we're going towards a professional model of college sports, and what would I advocate for? What kind of system, process, or policy would I push for? I just want to just throw that out there. What I would push for is one fundamental change. If folks still have to be full-time students, they still have to be enrolled and all of that stuff. That's another conversation for another day. What I would push for is institutional accountability for student athlete career readiness and post-college success. We already have a framework for how to do that. APR and GSR never existed, didn't exist back in the day. We've created a whole framework for how to monitor, track, and enforce academic standards. We could do the same thing around post-college success and career readiness so that when you go play for Cliff Kingsbury or the guy who's at Lincoln Riley, you might win a Heisman as a quarterback. It's going to set you up to go to the league. Well, what does that look like in terms of if you go to that program, your career readiness is going to be off the charts, and you're going to walk in and be a productive citizen right when you're gone. So institutional accountability for post-college success.
Thanks, Dr. Kroon. Fry, one last thought.
I have like point 1 and point 2. One is conflict skills. You got to get them. And I think the second one is these next 4 years are going to be hard. Take care of yourself. You don't have to do everything. Like, it's okay if you could do it in 2 hours and it takes you a day. Like, it's okay. And I think so many times as Black people, we're told we have to be twice as good. And I need y'all to chill with that shit. I need y'all to have some soft life stuff and be okay with just managing your mental health and taking care of yourself and your family, because it's going to be tough. Oh, and get a damn therapist. Get a therapist, every single person.
Take care of yourself. That's right. Dr. Richardson, bring us home.
All right. Just want to let you know and shout out to my sister docs, my fellow sister docs out there who told me that feminism in the traditional sense requires racial disparities in places for white women to thrive. That's why I was kind of one of my points. But also, and second, DEI, this comes from my niece who actually who does DEI work in Portland. She said, look, go from policy, DEI, you have to go from policy to practice. You can't keep talking it to death. You got to go from policy to practice. Love you, Kobe. And then finally, HBCUs. People realize that, HBCUs are really, really, Deion Sanders just in the past 5 years, Kamala Harris, putting HBCUs on the map. I'm going to tell Black businesses, don't come to our doorsteps if you're not really trying to work with us. HBCUs have brilliant young men and women who have been on the cusp, who have affected the history of the United States, if not the world. Right. HBCUs are there, we're there, and we all have something to give. So please, when we talk about this DEI work, don't think that we don't do it at HBCUs. We do it on HBCUs, we create it, then we take it out into the world and make the world great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I've got like 45 minutes of questions left to ask you, and sadly, we can't get to that. I do know this. I want to continue this conversation, and we might have a chance to do so, I hope so, at the Drake Symposium that's coming up in April. You all will get information about that, but unfortunately, our time has come to a close. Dr. Richardson, Dr. Kroon, Dr. Fry, thank you so much for your insights and comments. Attendees, we appreciate you coming and we appreciate your engagement with questions as well. Thank you all so much. See you on the other side at the symposium in April. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.